I'm oral historian Mike Chappell. Today, June 11, 2009, I'm interviewing Dr. J. Lester Gabrilove for the Endocrine Society at its annual meeting being held this year at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center in Washington, D.C. Dr. Gabrilove has been a pioneer in the field of endocrinology for more than 60 years. His research has provided new insights into feminizing and virilizing disorders of the adrenal gland and gonads, gynecomastia, Cushing's syndrome, thyroid toxicosis, and the medical treatment of prostatic hyperplasia. Dr. Gabrilove co-founded the endocrine clinic at Mount Sinai Hospital in 1952. 55 years later, in 2007, Mount Sinai formally renamed its endocrine division the Hilda and J. Lester Gabrilove, MD, Division of Endocrinology, Diabetes, and Bone Diseases, in honor of Dr. Gabrilove and his wife, Hilda. Currently, Dr. Gabrilove is the Florence and Theodore Baumritter Professor of Medicine, Emeritus, at Mount Sinai School of Medicine.
And I was accepted at Mount Sinai, which was the premier Jewish hospital and one of the premier hospitals in the whole country. In those days, when you're an intern and you're a resident, you spent all your life at the hospital. I mean, to have a night out on the town was very, very unusual. We would date the nurses when we did go out, but we didn't, we'd work till 1 or 2 o'clock at night every night. So it was a hectic schedule and full time. Dr. Libman was a very generous man and supported a lot of Mount Sinai graduates for postgraduate education after they finished their internship or residency. And I said I was interested in salt and water metabolism. He said, why don't you go see Jack Peters? Peters was one of the leading scientists in the medical field. He co-wrote Peters, A Man's Like, which was sort of a Bible to everybody in academic medicine. It was clinical biochemistry and was in 2 volumes, as I recall. So I went up to see Dr. Peters, and he interviewed me, and he took me on, and I went up there for a year. And there he was in charge of salt and water metabolism, as well as all metabolic diseases, including diabetes. So I had the exposure to all of these at that time.
What was the status of endocrinology at Mount Sinai at this time?
It was barely existing there. I mean, although there are a lot of things that had been done, Mount Sinai. Saul Silver and B.S. Oppenheimer had described Cushing's syndrome in detail a number of years ago. And investigators at Mount Sinai did various things in thyroid. Arthur Sovell had done, and Freddie King had done some work on thyroid. So there was no specialization in it then, but people were doing work in endocrinology.
In 1945, you did a paper with Dr. Sofer and Morley Kurt.
Oh, yes. I was resident in medicine then. And introduction of the thiouracil drug. There was one paper published, and I saw it. I said, I went to my attendings, said, can we have permission to study this? And so we did. There were 2 medical divisions. One, Morley Kurt was the resident, and I was the resident on the other. So we gathered whatever thyroid patients we could get, we studied them and reported them. And it was, I guess, the 2nd or 3rd paper on the use of the thiourea derivatives in hyperthyroidism. It was confirmatory of Dr. Astwood's original paper on that, so it was quite significant. I encountered patients with feminization, and when I investigated it, find that they had adrenal tumors, and then there was known that they could cause virilization as well as feminization. So I looked into everything and wrote what was the definitive paper on feminizing adrenal cortical tumors. To this day, I think it's still the classical paper on the field. I continued in the adrenal then and investigated virilizing syndromes, feminizing syndromes, Addison's disease, Cushing's syndrome, everything about the adrenal. I wiped it clean. The polycystic ovaries is something I'm interested in now. I just published a paper, Polycystic Ovary Unravelled, and I think I've delineated the main mechanism in polycystic ovary. 40 years ago, I published a paper and I said that the polycystic ovary syndrome was a failure in aromatase, an abnormal ratio of testosterone estradiol. And these fellas, when they gave valproate, induced an abnormality in the testosterone estradiol ratio and produced polycystic ovaries. So I said, QED. I'm waiting to hear the reverberations because all the people have been thinking polycystic ovary is related more to the diabetes feeding of the polycystic ovary. But that's a secondary phenomenon. The basic phenomenon, I think, is in aromatase, and I think it's very, very important. And since I published this, the original 40 years ago, now, if it comes true, it'll be a nice thing. It's good that I lived this long. I've always been very interested and dedicated to the society and did whatever they called on me to do. And I've enjoyed my relationship all of these years. And I was the local chairman when it was held in New York. And then more recently, I was on the history committee. So we're making history now.